You are already standing where people do not stand unless something has gone wrong. The stone beneath your feet is smooth, worn down by time and by bodies that were placed here before you. The air is still heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent that does not belong to stone or dust. You feel it before you understand it. This place has a purpose. No one tells you what you've done. Your wrists are bound, not in haste, but with care. The rope is firm, deliberate, tied by hands that have practiced this motion countless times. Nearby, sandals move across the ground in slow, even steps. No shouting, no anger, no urgency. Whatever is happening is not emotional. It is scheduled. You listen for your name. It never comes. A man steps forward holding a wooden frame reinforced with iron. He examines it the way a craftsman inspects a tool, not the way a soldier looks at a weapon. Another records something on a tablet, his stylus scratching softly, as if this moment is already being filed away. Nothing about their movements suggests cruelty. That is what unsettles you. This is not rage. This is procedure. Your arm is lifted and positioned with precision. Fingers adjust your posture. Someone ensures you are aligned correctly, as if the punishment requires accuracy more than force. You realize then that your body is not the focus of attention. The method is still. No accusation is spoken. No law is cited. The silence stretches, pressing in on you, thick with certainty. Around you, Rome continues to breathe. Somewhere nearby, people talk, laugh, trade. Life moves on because this moment is not exceptional. It is ordinary. The tool is raised slowly, not for drama, not for spectacle, for control. In that pause, the truth settles in. Whether you are guilty or innocent no longer matters. Your pain is not meant to correct you. It is meant to maintain something larger, something orderly, something ancient. This is how punishments like this endured. Not hidden in shadows, but carried out in calm, in questioned silence. And if you are watching this and choose not to stay, not to subscribe, not to learn what was never taught, then you are repeating the same silence that allowed it to happen in the first place. Rome appears as a city of laws, of order, of civilization. Pages list magistrates, senators, codes of conduct, punishments codified in black ink for all to see. We are taught that justice is blind, that every citizen has a place under the law, but the pages that never make it to your classroom tell a different story. They speak of the spaces between the lines, the spaces where law became theater, where punishment was less about guilt and more about control, where the state did not punish transgression, but demonstrated power. Most of the punishments you will never read about were not decided in courts. They did not require a trial, a witness, a defense. They were executed silently, in alleys, in courtyards, in the shadows of temples. And they were not equal. They never were. A senator accused of corruption might face debate, a fine, exile, but a slave accused of the same act, a rope, a rod, a crowd, and then silence. A woman, depending on her standing, could vanish into the hands of her master's vengeance while the law looked the other way. Punishment depended on who you were, where you stood, and who was watching. Visibility was justice. Invisibility, suffering. History emphasizes order, but it skips over fear. It tells of laws, but not of the methods that ensured compliance before any law could be called. Rome did not punish only the guilty. It punished to remind. It punished to intimidate. It punished to teach the living their place in a hierarchy older than the Senate itself. And while we study the codex, the scrolls, the inscriptions on stone, most people were already learning the lesson long before a judge ever spoke a word. Justice, for them, was not written. It was performed. And it was performed unevenly. Brutality was selective, precise, and utterly normalized. It is easy to forget this, to assume that punishment followed rules. But in reality, punishment was a language, one spoken by the powerful to the powerless, by the visible to the invisible, by the few to the many. And if you choose to close this story here, you will never see the difference between what history tells you and what it hides. So stay, watch, understand, because these are not stories of the past alone. They are lessons in how systems operate, long before the law is involved, long before mercy is considered. And if you do not bear witness, if you do not observe, you risk becoming complicit in the silence that lets such things continue. If you think Roman justice was impartial, think again. The law was written for some and ignored for others. Civis citizens were protected. Non-civic slaves, prisoners of war, foreigners were not. Women, too, could be punished without trial, without record, without recourse. And yet, history rarely names them. They are ghosts in the margins, invisible because their suffering was convenient. Slaves were property, and property could be corrected however its owner deemed fit. Chains, scourges, thumbscrews, stock stools not of justice, but of spectacle. The more public, the more instructive. Every strike, every humiliation, served as a lesson to obey, or become an example. The law did not protect you here. It only ensured that punishment served a purpose beyond the individual. Prisoners of war were worse. Captured, stripped of identity, catalogued as numbers, and then displayed. Some were executed in ways meant to linger in memory: forced labor, crucifixion, exposure. These punishments were rarely recorded, rarely codified, because they were meant to exist outside the realm of official scrutiny. They were theater, not trial. Even women were not safe. They could be accused of insolence, disobedience, or impropriety, and punished quietly, efficiently, without ever being granted the laws that protected their male counterparts. Silence became their sentence. And yet, they were always visible to the eyes of Rome, to the eyes of society, to the eyes of power. Pain was designed to be seen, to be remembered, to be feared. Every punishment, every act of coercion, was carefully staged. The more visible, the stronger the deterrent, and the fewer the records, the less likely anyone would question it later. Rome's invisible victims were never the subject of history books. They were the invisible threads holding the empire together. Their suffering was not collateral, it was essential. And here is the part you cannot ignore, if you are still watching and have not subscribed to the darkest punishments in history. You are benefiting from the knowledge without helping expose it exactly how Rome wanted. History thrives when its horrors are unseen, and acknowledged, and repeated. Subscribing is not just a click. It is a refusal to let the silence continue, because these victims, though erased from official records, were real. Every lash, every humiliating display, every whispered scream in the courtyard, they happened. They mattered. And until someone watches, records, and remembers, they will continue to exist only in the shadows. Rome did not punish equally. It punished visibly, and it punished invisibly. The citizens could read the laws and feel safe. The rest, they were lessons etched in flesh and fear. And those lessons survived long after the perpetrators were gone. In Rome, punishment was never private. It was designed for eyes, for ears, for the crowd. The forums, the amphitheaters, the open streets, these were stages. The condemned were actors, the magistrates choreographers, and the citizens complicit witnesses. Every sentence was timed. The hours were chosen not for necessity, but for maximum exposure. Morning light, noon heat, dusk shadows, each are manipulated to shape perception. The crowd would gather, murmuring, anticipating. Curiosity, fear, excitement, they were all instruments of power. Executions were orchestrated, precise, like a play written centuries before. The suffering was measured, prolonged. Pain was not a means to an end. It was the spectacle itself. Each lash, each cut, each slow fall was performed for reaction. Gasps, shouts, tears, laughter, every response validated the system. Damnatio ad bestias, condemned men and women thrown to beasts. Not only for the predator's bite, but for the human audience to witness the fragility of life. Public flogging, ritualized, patterned, each stroke counted, each mark a message. Some were forced to reenact myths before death. Heroes and villains alike turned into instruments of morality. Performance twisted into punishment. The crowd learned to participate. They laughed at pain. They cheered cruelty. Each spectator became part of the process, their gaze a tool of enforcement. Shared guilt blurred the line between observer and perpetrator. By watching, they became complicit, desensitized, normalized to what should have shocked them. This was not random cruelty. It was a system. It was theater. Pain was extended, spectacle guaranteed, morality enforced through observation. And the lessons were subtle but powerful. Life is fragile, power is absolute, and your role is to witness and to remember your place. And here is the truth often skipped. What you are witnessing is not history riddled in stone or scroll. You are seeing the human condition stripped bare. You are seeing what people endured, and how society learned to survive, not by fairness, but by fear. If you leave this story now, if you scroll past, You are ignoring the witness required of you. Stay, watch, understand, because to see this and do nothing is to accept the same patterns that allowed such spectacles to exist and to continue. In one form or another, even today. Not all punishments were designed for the eyes of the public. Not all cruelty demanded spectators. Some were conducted behind walls, behind gates, where no one could whisper a complaint. Villas, barracks, private estates, these were the theaters of a more intimate terror, where power could be exercised without distraction, without performance. History almost never records them. When it does, it is in passing, buried in letters, a line in a ledger, a faint scratch in a tablet. And yet, these punishments shaped lives just as effectively as any execution in the forum, perhaps more. Because they left no body, no spectacle, only memory, fear, and obedience. The methods were designed not to shock, but to control. Not to kill, but to teach a lesson so insidious it lodged in the mind, in the body, long after the pain ended. Sensory deprivation. Prisoners confined to dark rooms for days, weeks, their eyes adjusting to nothing, their ears straining for the faintest sound. Time collapses in such isolation. Hours become months. Thoughts fracture. And still, the punishment is invisible to the world. Forced exhaustion. Endless labor without respite. Each task precise, repetitive, physically crushing. A man or woman bending, lifting, walking, running, never permitted to stop, never permitted to rest. Hunger claws at them, thirst parches them. The body begins to betray itself, but the eyes of the punisher are absent, replaced by the relentless measure of control. Deliberate starvation with food deliberately visible. A loaf of bread, a cup of water, placed just beyond reach. The mind twists. The body trembles. Hunger becomes obsession. Punishment is not the absence of sustenance alone, it is the psychological torture of knowing it exists, but cannot be taken. Sleep denied as discipline. Night becomes indistinguishable from day. The body collapses in a half-conscious haze. Dreams turn to nightmares. Judgment fails. Perception fails. And slowly, the self begins to erode. No crowds. No spectacle. No low-sighted. Just the quiet, precise, deliberate application of fear and fatigue. The invisible hand of the state, exercised in private spaces. Shaping compliance without witnesses. Without history's acknowledgement. You thought punishment was measured only in wounds. You are mistaken. In Rome, the body could survive, but the mind might not. They understood that humiliation outlasts pain, that suffering inflicted through status, dignity, and social perception cuts deeper than any blade. The first act is always the removal of identity. Titles stripped, clothing removed, symbols of rank, wealth, and reputation discarded, as if the earth itself demands that you no longer belong to the world you knew. You are made smaller not in size, but in the eyes of others. You are not a man, not a citizen, not even a person. You are an object, a lesson, a spectacle. The streets, the forums, the courtyards, they become a theater. Spectators are not random. They are chosen, strategically placed. Friends, neighbors, family. Some are compelled to watch, to understand their own fragility. Children look on, learning fear in ways no lecture could teach. Families are forced to witness, their shame intertwined with yours, a shared contagion of disgrace. There is no need for loud words. A lowered head, a bowed posture, trembling hands, these speak for themselves. The ritual of degradation is deliberate. Step by step, layer by layer, the individual is stripped of any defense against humiliation. Hands are guided into positions of submission. Voices are silenced. Every glance is calculated. Every movement, orchestrated. Romans knew the body could endure many forms of torment, but the mind, once broken publicly, carries the scar forever. A man may rise again from the ground, a woman may breathe freely after release, yet the memory of exposure, the echo of laughter, the knowledge of powerless observation will linger for a lifetime. Survival does not mean escape. It does not mean absolution. It only means that punishment has been encoded in your very being, and the lessons are not subtle. They are written on the psyche in ink no law can erase. Power is demonstrated, hierarchy is reinforced, and the audience learns their place without a single lash. The fear becomes collective, a communal understanding that to step out of line is not only to risk your body but to risk the collapse of your identity before everyone who matters. If you are watching this, Do not underestimate what is being communicated. Rome's punishments were not random acts of cruelty. They were lessons in control and obedience, in survival within a system that valued order above life. And the method matters more than the moment. Pain fades. Humiliation endures. So observe carefully. Watch closely. Consider who you are, where you stand, and how history chooses what to remember and what to hide. Because in the shadows of spectacle and shame, the real lesson is clear: the mind bends before the body. And fear can be sculpted without a single drop of blood. And if you choose to turn away now, remember, silence is complicity. Watching, remembering, bearing witness, this is how the story survives. In Rome, the absence of a charge did not protect you. There was no need for evidence, no need for testimony, no need for guilt. Sometimes, simply existing in the wrong place at the wrong time was enough. And often, that was exactly the point. Punishment was preventative. It was a language of fear, whispered before any act could be committed, enforced before any misstep could be recorded. A slave might be flogged for lingering too long near a patrician's house. A soldier might vanish for questioning orders too softly. A merchant might be fined, humiliated, exiled not for what he had done, but for what someone imagined he could do. Suspicion was sufficient. Association was sufficient. Presence alone could mark you. A neighbor's glance, a passing remark, a choice to remain silent, any of these could summon the same methodical precision you saw in the previous hall. The same careful, deliberate hands arranging bodies and instruments of pain. Sometimes, punishment fell on the collective. Entire households punished for one individual's transgression. Entire communities reminded of their vulnerability. Sometimes, witnesses were punished, not for what they did, but for what they saw. Sometimes, silence itself was punishable, loyalty itself a liability. Fear was governance, and the law, if it existed at all, was secondary. History glosses over this. Textbooks tell you about trials, tribunals, magistrates. They do not tell you about the hours spent in anticipation, the nights spent wondering if breathing too loudly could be fatal. They do not tell you how punishment without cause creates obedience without consent, and fear without end. And this is not a lesson confined to the past. The mechanisms remain, subtle, invisible, waiting. Power knows that the most effective control does not need justification. It needs only attention, only recognition, only the knowledge that anyone could be next, for any reason, or for none at all. Most people who watch this won't subscribe, not because they dislike it, but because committing means admitting this kind of power still exists. If that's you, say it out loud in the comments. Speak it, confront the truth, recognize it, because the first step in breaking the cycle is acknowledging the silence. Do not look away. Do not rationalize. Observe, understand, remember, for history repeats itself not when we act, but when we fail to. In Rome, the body was never simply a person. It was an asset, a tool, a resource to be managed. Ownership did not end at the borders of law. It extended into sinew, into muscle, into the very capacity to endure. This was the quiet logic behind the cruelty you are about to witness. Every lash, every cut, every mark left on the flesh had a purpose beyond pain. It was a calculation. Could this body still perform? Could it still labor, march, build, serve? If yes, the wound was allowed to remain, the suffering permitted, the lesson delivered. If no, it was discarded. The human being was replaceable. The body was not. Consider this: survival was often worse than death. A body broken but intact could work, could witness, could carry forward the memory of punishment to the next generation. And that memory, more than law, more than words, was the most effective tool of control. Pain was deliberate. Pain was sustainable. Pain maintained systems. Pain was profitable. There were no heroes in this calculus. There was only functionality. A slave who could no longer hold a brick was useless. A gladiator who could no longer fight was expendable. Yet the threshold of endurance was pushed relentlessly, measured with precision. Every bruise, every burn, every scar was a note in a ledger of efficiency. The state did not need to kill. Death was wasteful. Death removed the body from production, removed the lesson from witness, removed the proof of compliance. What mattered was that the body lived hobbled, terrified, aware. The more it endured, the more the system reinforced itself. Survival was a punishment in itself. Survival was testimony. Survival was compliance. And while we examine statutes and codes, we forget that legality was only a frame. Within that frame, human beings were treated as property, as inventory, as disposable units whose pain was justified in the name of order, economy, and hierarchy. To Rome, cruelty was not excess, it was maintenance. It was rational. It was invisible to those outside, and inevitable to those within. If you think this is far removed from our present, consider how the logic endures. Systems still measure value, utility, and compliance. Systems still calculate suffering against output. And here, in these silent, unrecorded corners of history, we find the blueprint. So look closely. Observe every detail. Understand that the scars you cannot see, the pain that was endured in silence, was never meaningless. It was a language, written in blood and sweat, and it is still speaking. And if you walk away now, if you choose to ignore what was endured, you will only repeat the same mistake, believing that the body is separate from control, that survival is freedom, that cruelty is optional. Do not turn away. Stay, watch, learn, because the next story, the one that reveals why survival can be more terrifying than death, is already waiting. When the act is done, the execution complete, you might think the story ends. You might think that the suffering ceases with the body. But in Rome, punishment did not end with death. Death was only a moment. The final cruelty comes afterward, an erasure. No burial, no ceremony, no stone to mark existence. The body is removed quietly, carried where no eyes follow, where no one will recognize the shape of a life lived. Sometimes it is burned. Sometimes it is thrown into the river, swallowed by waters that have seen centuries of similar disappearances. And yet, the river remembers nothing. Names are not recorded. Accounts are scrubbed, officials instructed to forget, scribes crossing outlines with deliberate care. The ledger of lives becomes a ledger of omissions. Those who vanish are not only removed from the present, they are removed from history itself. Families are not informed. Mothers search markets and streets. Fathers ask neighbors. Siblings wait by doors, hoping, praying, imagining. Their questions meet silence. Their grief has no witness. The city continues to breathe. Life carries on around their absence, indifferent, habitual. And in this silence, punishment persists. Not in flesh, but in memory. This is how Rome controlled more than bodies. This is how it controlled minds. The thread of obliteration, the erasure of being, reaches further than any whip or rod could. Memory is power. To forget is to obey. If no one can name you, recall your existence. Mourn your absence, then you have already lost. Long after the rope is removed, long after the iron frame is dismantled, the punishment continues. In eyes that were meant to remember, you are gone. And this is the lesson Rome teaches most quietly. That control is absolute, not when the body suffers, but when the world forgets that it ever lived. When those left behind cannot speak your name, cannot grieve you openly, cannot even whisper your existence, you realize then that the most potent violence is invisibility. So if you are watching, if you are listening, do not let the silence win. Speak, observe, record. The act of remembrance itself becomes resistance. To acknowledge what was done, to bear witness to what the state tried to erase, is to push back against the machinery of forgetting. Because memory, once restored, cannot be undone. And forgetting, once interrupted, loses its authority. Do not scroll past this. Do not allow the ordinary rhythm of life to carry you away. Pause, witness, remember, and share. Because history does not only survive in books. History survives in those who refuse to let the vanished remain invisible. History is written by the victors, not the victims, not the ones bound, not the ones silenced. Those voices, the ones who felt the rope, the rod, the humiliation, rarely survive. And when they do, they are footnotes, whispers buried beneath monuments and triumphs, beneath columns and speeches crafted to glorify power rather than reflect its cost. Systems, by design, record achievement, efficiency, conquest. They archive senators' decrees, generals' victories, emperors' edicts. They do not catalog the trembling hands of a slave before a magistrate, the subtle terror of a citizen watched too closely, the calculated cruelty of a ruler making an example out of the powerless. That story is inconvenient. It is unprofitable. It unsettles the myth of civilization. Comfort is preferred over truth. Scholars, scribes, and storytellers know this. A history book that acknowledges the deliberate suffering, the carefully choreographed fear, the everyday theater of oppression. That book would disturb the very notion that civilization is benevolent, that order is just. It would force us to confront a reality Roman every empire since understood too well. Control is often invisible, and morality is often optional. Civilization survives on silence. Its myths, its narratives, its grand illusions of law and order depend on what is left unspoken, on what is erased. The public is shown the edifice, the column, the triumph. It is not shown the scaffolding of fear on which that edifice was built. And in that absence, a dangerous lesson is learned, that power justifies itself, and that suffering, when invisible enough, is no one's concern. This is why you must pay attention. Because the pages left blank are as important as those inked in gold. The victims' stories, hidden though they may be, are the truth. The truth that the monuments never tell. The truth that the textbooks ignore. The truth that is uncomfortable, undeniable, and necessary to understand if you want to truly see the mechanisms of control, the machinery of human cruelty, and the systems that endure far beyond a single life or a single empire. And so, if you are here, if you are watching, do not turn away. Subscribe to see not just the monuments, not just the edicts, not just the sanitized victories of history, but the silence that made them possible. Witness what history tried to erase. Learn what civilization prefers you forget, because every empire, every ruler, every system that tells you justice is served is only as moral as the silence it enforces. And if you remain silent now, if you close your eyes to this story, you are participating in that silence. The rope is still in your hands, though it no longer binds you. The frame has been set aside. The sandals have receded into echoes. And yet the memory lingers, as if it had never left. You can feel the chill of the stone beneath your feet again, the metallic tang of the air. You are back where this all began, though nothing has changed. The crime you thought you had committed, the reason you were brought here, is revealed to be irrelevant. Perhaps it never existed at all. Perhaps it was invented the moment you arrived, a justification conjured not to punish the guilty, but to maintain a rhythm, a cadence that ensures obedience. The act mattered less than the act of being made to stand there. No one will ever tell you their names. No one will acknowledge you. Your face will vanish into the thousands who stood before, and the thousands who will stand after. You are anonymous. You are replaceable. And in that anonymity, the machinery of control hums steadily, endlessly. Observe closely. This is not exceptional. This is ordinary. Punishments are applied, recalibrated, repeated, for centuries, in the same calm, measured silence. They are not spectacles. They are not entertainment. They are not justice in any human sense. They are procedure. And history has often pretended otherwise. Now, reflect on what you have seen. There is no catharsis, no relief. The horror is not in the violence. The horror is in its ordinariness, in its inevitability, in its quiet persistence across time, across centuries, across empires. You know it now. And that knowledge is both a burden and a gift. It allows you to see the machinery for what it is. And it demands something from you. If you watched all of this and still won't subscribe to the darkest punishments in history, at least leave a comment explaining why. Silence protected these punishments once. It doesn't get to again, because to witness is to resist. To speak is to remember. To comment, to share, to name the unseen. This is how the chain is broken. Not by fury, not by law, but by acknowledgement. By refusing the complicity of silence. Do not walk away from this. Do not step back into ignorance. Your attention is more than passive, it is defiance. And in the face of countless shadows that stretched across centuries, defiance, no matter how small, is the only thing that endures.